Less than a year after winning Euro 2020, Italy lost a World Cup playoff at home to North Macedonia, in stoppage time, with 32 shots. That result didn't just eliminate Italy from a tournament. It exposed something that had been building for 2 decades, quietly, politely, and at enormous cost. This is the complete story of Italian football's collapse. Not one bad tournament, not one bad manager, the whole thing, from the summit to the wreckage. Italy won 4 World Cups. Only Brazil has ever won more. They gave the world Maldini, Pirlo, Cannavaro, Totti. Players who didn't just win matches, they made other teams feel hopeless before kickoff. And now they've watched 3 consecutive World Cups on television. We're going to explain exactly how that happened. And the most uncomfortable answer is one Italy still doesn't fully want to hear. Start with what Italy actually were, because if you don't understand the height, the fall doesn't make sense. 4 World Cup titles. 1,934, 1,938, 1,982, 2006. 18 appearances in the tournament before the current streak of absences. Italy were the first country to retain the World Cup, winning back-to-back in 1934 and 1938 under Vittorio Pozzo, a record that still stands. By the time Cannavaro lifted the trophy in Berlin in 2006, only Brazil had done it more. But the trophies only tell half the story. What made Italy genuinely feared wasn't the number of wins, it was the feeling that tournament football bent to their temperament. When the pressure built, when the game got tight and ugly and unforgiving, Italy looked like the team specifically engineered for that kind of suffering. Other nations wanted to win. Italy looked like they'd practiced winning the hard way since birth. That's inseparable from what Catenaccio actually meant. Not just a formation, a philosophy. A libero, a free defender, sitting behind the man markers, built specifically to make attacking football feel like trying to break through a wall that kept moving. The system turned defending into a form of psychological warfare. Opposing strikers didn't just struggle to score against Italy. They started questioning whether scoring was even possible. And the players who embodied it weren't just technically elite. They were reference points for an entire idea of what football should look like. Paolo Maldini made tackling look like art, the kind of player whose positioning was so perfect he almost never had to tackle at full stretch. Andrea Pirlo controlled enormous matches by operating at a pace that felt almost insulting to how fast everyone around him was running. Francesco Totti carried imagination and arrogance in exactly the right ratio, the kind of player who made you slightly nervous even when he hadn't touched the ball for 10 minutes. These weren't just famous players, they were proof of a football culture that knew exactly what it was. The best single human story inside Italy's golden era doesn't belong to Maldini or Totti. It belongs to a striker who almost didn't make it there at all. Paolo Rossi arrived at the 1982 World Cup in Spain under suspicion. He'd only recently returned from a 2-year ban for his involvement in the Totonero match-fixing scandal, Italy's domestic betting corruption crisis. His form before the tournament was poor. His inclusion was a gamble. Enzo Bearzot backed him anyway. What happened next remains one of the strangest and most extraordinary passages in World Cup history. Rossi scored 6 goals in 5 matches and won the Golden Boot. He broke Brazil open with a hat-trick in a 3-2 group stage win that is still discussed as one of the greatest matches ever played. He scored against Poland in the semi-final. He scored in the final against West Germany. Italy won 3-1. Banned for corruption. Back in 2 years. Golden Boot at the World Cup. There's no template for that arc. And the fact that Italy trusted him enough to start him, and that he delivered at that level, tells you something important about what Italy was at its absolute peak. A country that could absorb chaos, apply structure, and still produce something magnificent. The contrast with what came later is almost too cruel to say out loud. By 2006, Italian football had evolved, but the core remained intact. A team that found ways to grind opponents into dust and remained standing when everyone else had crumbled. Fabio Cannavaro captained Italy through that tournament in Germany and was so dominant that he later won both the Ballon d'Or and FIFA World Player of the Year. A centre-back. Not a striker, not a playmaker, a defender. That tells you exactly what Italian football valued and exactly what it was capable of producing at that level. The final against France in Berlin ended 1-1 after extra time. Materazzi scored Italy's goal. Zidane scored for France from the penalty spot, then was sent off for the headbutt on Materazzi in extra time. An exit so dramatic it still gets discussed whenever that tournament comes up. Italy won 5-3 on penalties. Cannavaro lifted the trophy. On the surface, it looked like confirmation of everything Italy had always been. Cold-blooded, resilient, utterly inevitable. Here's the thing nobody wanted to say that night. The 2006 World Cup was won in the same year Italian football was being torn apart by Calciopoli, the match-fixing scandal that saw Juventus relegated to Serie B and stripped of 2 league titles, with AC Milan, Fiorentina and Lazio all receiving points deductions. The tournament final was happening while the domestic game underneath it was already fractured, morally damaged, and structurally far weaker than the trophy made it look. Massimo Oddo and Marco Emilia, both winners in Berlin, have since said it directly. The 2006 victory masked deeper problems already forming inside Italian football. Poor youth development, too little trust in young Italian players, weak long-term planning, a system that kept choosing short-term fixes over long-term health. 2006 wasn't the start of another great Italian age. It was the last masterpiece produced on foundations that were already beginning to fail. Italy celebrated in Berlin. Italian football was already breaking. What came next didn't look like collapse at first. It looked like a champion getting old. That's what makes it so easy to miss and so expensive to have missed it. South Africa, 2010. Italy arrive as the defending world champions. They finish bottom of Group F with 2 points, drawing with Paraguay and New Zealand before losing 3-2 to Slovakia. The defending world champions. Bottom of their group. It was embarrassing on a scale that should have triggered immediate, genuine reckoning. It didn't. Brazil, 2014. A bright opening win over England 2-1. Then defeat to Costa Rica. Then the 1-0 loss to Uruguay, a match remembered most for Luis Suarez biting Giorgio Chiellini's shoulder, earning Suarez a 4-month ban. He was punished. Italy went home anyway. 2 consecutive group stage exits for a 4-time world champion. The shirt had stopped protecting them. When a team like Italy goes out early once, you call it a bad tournament. When it happens twice in a row, you're describing a pattern. Then came November 2017, and the moment when decline stopped being theoretical. Italy played Sweden in a 2-legged World Cup qualifying playoff. They lost 1-0 on aggregate. They failed to reach the World Cup for the first time since 1958. 59 years of consecutive appearances, every tournament from Chile 1962 through to Russia 2018 was supposed to include Italy. That run ended in Turin on a night when the scale of what had gone wrong finally couldn't be dressed up as bad luck. Gian Piero Ventura was sacked. The FIGC entered a period of institutional chaos. And here is the critical thing. Italy's response to that failure was to treat it as a national embarrassment rather than a structural diagnosis. Those two things lead to completely different outcomes. Embarrassment makes you change the manager and shuffle the squad and hope the cycle corrects itself. Diagnosis makes you look at the academy system, the league structure, the coaching pathways, the investment pipeline. Italy, institutionally, did far more of the former than the latter. And the system paid for that choice. Roberto Mancini deserves full credit for what came next. He took a broken squad and modernized everything: the football, the mood, the tactical approach. He built something that actually looked alive again. By the time Euro 2020 concluded, in the summer of 2021, Italy had gone 34 matches, unbeaten, a new national record. They beat Belgium in the quarterfinals, Spain on penalties in the semi-finals, and England on penalties in the Wembley final. Jorginho set the rhythm. Verratti carried the ball through pressure. Barella attacked spaces. Bonucci and Chiellini gave the team that old Italian edge when games got tight. For a moment, genuinely, it felt like the Azzurri were back. This is the most controversial thing in this entire video, and I want to be clear about why I'm saying it. Euro 2020 was not proof that the foundations of Italian football were healthy. It was proof that a well-coached Italian team could still peak brilliantly inside a short tournament. And there is a significant difference between peaking and rebuilding. Men from the 2006 squad have said openly that the Euro 2020 victory never fixed Italy's structural problems. It distracted the world from them, painted over the crack in the wall, pointed at how nice the paint looked. Yes, I know, the comments are going to be brutal for this one, but look at what happened next and tell me the evidence doesn't support it. March 2022, less than a year after the Wembley final. Italy versus North Macedonia in a World Cup playoff semi-final at home. Italy dominated the match entirely. And, in the 92nd minute, Alexander Trajkovski scored. 1-0. European champions. Out of the World Cup. At home. In stoppage time. In a playoff. The scoreline was simple. The meaning was enormous. Italy had now failed to reach 2 consecutive World Cups. The second miss came immediately after winning a major international trophy. The rebuilding argument had a time limit, and the clock had just expired. Italy could still produce isolated peaks. They just couldn't sustain anything. And then came the moment the history books will mark as definitive. Italy reached the 2026 World Cup playoff, beat Northern Ireland 2-0 the semi-final with goals from Sandro Tonali and Moise Kean, then faced Bosnia and Herzegovina in the final. Kean scored early. Alessandro Bastoni was sent off before half-time. Ermedin Tabakovic equalised late. Penalties. Italy missed twice. Bosnia held their nerve, 4-1 on penalties. Italy became the first former world champion in history to miss 3 consecutive World Cups. At some point, bad luck stops being a serious explanation. 3 consecutive absences isn't a curse, it's a verdict. So what actually sits underneath all of this? The blunt answer: Italy didn't run out of footballers. Italy ran out of generations. The foreign player issue in Serie A is real. In 2025-26, foreign players made up 68.5% of Serie A squads. Oddo and Emilia have both pointed at this as a factor. It squeezed playing time and development opportunities for young Italians. Data showed Serie A gave less than 1% of league minutes to under 2-1 domestic players, compared with nearly 8% in League One. But here's where the easy explanation gets complicated. France is just as international in its league and still produces elite talent in volume and consistency. The difference is, France built a development machine behind the imports. They invested in academies, in regional pathways, in a philosophy that treated youth development as infrastructure. Italy didn't do that at the same scale. The problem wasn't who came in. The problem was who stopped coming through. Oddo went as far as saying Chiellini was the last truly great Italian defender of the old tradition. That is a brutal thing to hear from inside the system. Old Italy always knew what it was organized. Hard to break, tactically ruthless. The kind of team that gave opposing strikers quiet existential crises during the warm-up. Modern Italy has been none of those things consistently. Not dominant in possession, not explosive physically, no longer the defensive fortress that made them feared for 5 decades. Italy used to know who they were. They're still figuring it out. The money tells its own story. and it's not comfortable. Serie A's domestic TV deal was worth around €2.9 billion across the previous 3-year cycle. The Premier League's comparable deal was close to double that. Serie A earned around €700 million from overseas broadcast rights across 2021 to 2024, roughly a fraction of what the Premier League generated from the same rights. Deloitte's Football Money League identified Serie A as the only one of Europe's Big Five leagues to post a revenue decline in that period, falling to €2.4 billion. When the money gap grows that wide, everything suffers: player retention, academy investment, infrastructure, the overall level of the entire ecosystem. On stadiums, only 6 Italian grounds were built or redeveloped between 2007 and 2024, compared with 19 inches Germany, 13 inches England, and 12 inches France. UEFA's president said Italy had the worst football infrastructure among Europe's top 5 leagues. Serie A matchday revenue was €440 million in 2023 to 24, less than half the Premier League total. Only Juventus's stadium clearly met the requirements being set for Euro 2032. Germany built stadiums. England built academies. France built pipelines. Italy debated it, eventually agreed to discuss it further at a later date, and then watched 3 World Cups from the sofa. That's not cynicism. That's what the timeline shows. Here's what makes Italy's story different from other fallen giants. Italy didn't fall because they had a catastrophic generation of players. They fell because the system stopped producing a future strong enough to carry the weight of their past. One brilliant player every few years isn't a pipeline, it's a lottery. And once the pipeline weakens, the league stops feeding the national team, the money gap widens, the infrastructure falls behind, and the whole thing drifts together, slowly, politely, over 20 years, until the name alone isn't enough anymore. After the 2026 playoff failure, criticism went directly at the federation. Weak long-term planning, poor youth coaching priorities, clubs choosing immediate results over development. The whole system stopped working simultaneously. History doesn't play in midfield. Italy have missed 3 consecutive World Cups, 4-time world champions, 18 consecutive appearances before 2018. The country that produced Maldini, Pirlo, Cannavaro, and Totti is watching from the outside for the 3rd time running. That didn't happen because of one bad playoff, one bad manager, or one goalkeeper who could have done better from 12 yards. It happened because a football nation spent 20 years looking at warning signs and telling itself the name would be enough. Here's the question worth sitting with. If Italy had never won Euro 2020, if that Wembley final had gone the other way, would the structural rebuild have started earlier? And would it have been more honest? Because the trophy didn't save Italian football. There's a real argument it delayed saving Italian football by 4 years. Make of that what you will.